We're very excited to have you all here today to talk about one of the hottest topics in healthcare right now, which is GLP-1s. You know, these are certainly remarkable drugs, and we're going to, get in depth with that today. And there's huge potential to help those who need it, who haven't necessarily had a solution before. But that help isn't as cost effective at the patent prices, and has potential to certainly have challenges on organizations and as disruptors in healthcare. It's certainly something that we're all solving for. We've seen drugs like this before with huge sticker prices and positive impacts, but not with such a large eligible population. And certainly not with influencers on social media spreading their own messages, right? There's just a lot of information, not all of it accurate, floating around. With weight management, there's a lot of alternatives and options for folks, but the trick is really getting the right person to the right solution for them in an efficient manner, whether it's GLP-1s or a lifestyle change program or both. So today we're going to walk you through and explore a lot of different angles of the challenges posed by these drugs. So think about challenges for business, right? How do you make sure that your employer clients and your members, some of who do and do not want to cover these drugs, how do you keep them all happy? How do you have a solution for all of them? Think about policy and regulatory challenges, right? So navigating a pretty gray area right now, medical necessity versus some vanity, and there's implications to all of it. And there's operational challenges. So, designing and scaling new step therapy and prior auth processes. So a lot of you have seen, whether it was through, your account directors or, following us on social or getting some of our marketing communications, but you've seen that we recently announced Solera's program, which we think is really a credible answer to these issues, combining lifestyle and clinical in a way that makes the no a little bit gentler. Giving an alternative solution instead of nothing, right? So we're helping to educate to better understand the situation. We're able to configure across lots of ASOs and books of business. And we're already working with a lot of you in your weight management arena. And this could certainly help you provide structure to a challenge, that you're currently addressing, have yet to address, or in the middle of figuring out what your organization's going to do. So throughout this presentation, certainly raise your virtual hand with questions, or go ahead and pop them into the Q&A, because that will be monitored. We're going to try to address them all during the call. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Ed to share with you some of the market insights and the role that digital health is playing in supporting your efforts.
Thanks, Jody. So when you think about GLP-1s and what's really going on in the market today, and we'll hand it over to Byron in a minute here for kind of the HEOR approach on what's going on. There's incredible demand, as you all know. There's been about a 2,000% increase since 2019 in the amount of GLP-1s that have been prescribed. 60% of Americans who are looking to lose weight are interested in going on a GLP-1. And as some of Byron's statistics will indicate, there's a real risk, not a unreal risk, that this could bankrupt the country if every person who is eligible for a GLP-1 went on a GLP-1. Now, some of the challenges you all are facing, and we'll get into some of this and discuss this kind of in a little bit here, the step therapy approach to getting people into GLP-1s. Do traditional prior auth and clinical workflow models work for the data that's necessary to triage somebody through the system? There are old frontline defenses like metformin that are now kind of having a resurgence, but not all teleprescribers are viewing those equally. And some have ulterior, motives and business models around those. And then lastly, when you think about the different stakeholders in industry, employers are all really nervous about their spend and trend when it comes to GLP-1s. And then you have PBMs that are pushing for people to go on them because of the revenue and margin that they provide. And you all, in a lot of ways, are stuck in the middle of the two and trying to figure out, how do you help determine the folks who are going to be successful in these therapies versus those that aren't? And how do you offer them the tools and alternatives to take advantage of really the new therapies that are out there? So we'll turn over to Byron to kind of walk through some of the economic impact, and then we'll get through some of the technology challenges and operating challenges of managing GLP-1 programs, offering alternatives, and really supporting your members in the way that they want to be supported. So Byron, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. It's great to have folks joining us. We've got a lot of folks on the call, all of whom, and myself included, have a vested interest in seeing these drugs deployed in a responsible way, managing the clinical effectiveness and the costs. You know, as a physician, and I lead our clinical team here at Solera, these drugs work very well. They're very effective. At the same time, the pharmaceutical companies have priced them at a level that, as you'll see, creates serious economic implications for everybody. When premiums go up, that's money out of an individual's pocket that they could have used for other things. And so how do we manage that effectively, and how can we make this easier for everybody across the country dealing with this? So we'll talk today about 5 key points. The first is we'll talk about major trends in the uptake and the cost impact of these medicines. And from that, provide an organizing framework to describe the tensions around these drugs, how payers are really caught in the middle and having to navigate a lot of complexity. Then we'll review some new findings from a recent national survey done by the Kaiser Family Foundation. How are patients actually thinking about these medicines? It's not as simple as it's been portrayed. Then we'll go through emerging trends in step therapy approaches. These are things that we're seeing in the market and have worked to integrate into our new program. And then I'll turn it over to Ed to talk about some of the operational complexity in GLP-1 step therapy, the role of technology solutions. And then we'll move into a roundtable discussion where we'll try and answer questions and spark some conversation about what else might be lingering in the wings in terms of your concerns about GLP-1s. So we know that these medicines are objectively a major advance in obesity medicine. And it's no surprise that with this advance, we're seeing increased demand. So almost a 6.5% compounded annual growth rate in these medicines. We had one plan tell us that they were seeing over $1 million weekly in increased pharmacy costs, at least from requests for new GLP-1s. And when you do the math, if we expand this medication at current prices to the entire population, it stands to increase national health expenditures by $1 trillion. That's a trillion with a T. So really serious implications for this medicine at scale, given the reach of the obesity crisis in America. I'll give you some actual numbers. So if you go back in time and look at premium growth from 2010 to 2011, or sorry, 2010 to 2022. So in the last decade, premiums increased on average about $250 per year for an individual plan. If we expand GLPs to everybody with obesity who's eligible, we get an annual increase in cost that's about 20 times that. So we're moving forward 20 years worth of premium growth all at once at scale. If you look at the graph, the blue bars are the average individual premium price in the United States, pegged at $7,900 on average. And you see at different levels of uptake of GLP-1s, premiums increase substantially. At the lowest end of 10% of eligible people, these are US adults, 10% of eligible US adults on commercial insurance are placed on a GLP-1 plan, premiums increase about 6%. At the other end, if 100% of people are placed on these medicines, premiums increase by 64% and top out at a little over $12,000 a year. So it's pretty self-evident that even small perturbations in the number of folks who are taking these medicines can drive up premiums quite a bit, and at the high end, cause serious economic pressures on everybody. With that in mind, it's not surprising that most insurers and employers are not covering these medicines right now, but a meaningful portion still are. There's been some recent data as of this summer that found that only about 12% of the general population were covered for these medicines in a real world setting. And then the estimates are around 20 to 30% of employers and insurers respectively are covering these medicines. So it's not a ton of plans, but it's also not not nothing either. There's a meaningful amount of employers who still are trying to cover these medicines, and are going to expect them to be covered to some degree. And then if you actually look at the individual level, most adults think that these medicines should be covered. So in a recent survey, which we'll go a little deeper into, 80% of adults who were polled said that they felt their insurers should cover these medicines for people with overweight or obesity. And even a simple Google search will show you that the marketing is strong. I did this morning. I just searched for GLP-1 prescription, and these are the first 2 results I get on Google. And there were several more. I get served ads all the time on the internet. I've seen TV commercials for these medicines. You know, there's ads in the subway in New York. There's a vested interest in many parties in having people take these medicines, and it's not always in the most responsible way, and not always in the most value-adding way. The individual attitudes are a little more complex, though, and we'll dive into that in a few slides. So payers are caught in the middle. There's multiple forces at play. No one wants member or employer abrasion, right? We want to help people. We want to be able to get people what they need. We don't like to say no. But financial stewardship is an incredibly important part of our healthcare system. And we've placed payers in the unenviable position of being de facto economic policymakers, right? These are drug costs that in other parts of the world are regulated. Governments negotiate with pharmaceutical companies and try and get to a price point that is sustainable. That's not what we're seeing here in the United States. We haven't had regulatory action in the commercial area. That's not true in Medicare, but in commercial, on trying to address the prices of these drugs. And then that's balanced against medical necessity. So GLP-1s are objectively effective at improving weight status. When individuals lose weight, it leads to decreased risk for cardiovascular disease. These medicines are included in recent guidelines from the AGA, one of the gastroenterological societies, and the ACCE, the American College of Clinical Endocrinology. So professional societies are saying, hey, the science says these medicines work and we should use them. But that's balanced against other economic and member experience considerations. We think step therapy is a really great approach that balances these needs nicely. And like I said, we'll go into more of the trends on step therapy in just a few minutes. But what do patients actually think? So if you ask individuals about these medicines, what are their views and attitudes? A most recent study came out just a few months ago in July, done by the Kaiser Family Foundation, one of the nation's best nonprofits interested in health policy and health services research. So they conducted a national survey, included over 1,000 adults, and asked them about their views and attitudes on GLP-1s. You know, hey, what do you think about these new drugs? Have you heard of them? Are these things you want? And the key points to take home are threefold. The first is that most people had heard of these. 70% of adults said, yeah, I've heard about these new drugs, which is no surprise. There's a lot of buzz. Among those who were trying to lose weight, so individuals who were trying to lose 20 pounds or more, 68% of those people said, yeah, I'm interested in these drugs. So a lot of folks have heard of these. There's a lot of interest in trying a medicine. And if you read the media, there are a lot of stories that I think position this as a gold rush for these medicines from patients, that folks are banging on the door to get these medicines, and there's nothing that can be done to stop them. And the survey results say that's not really the whole story. Actually, when people learn more about these medicines, they're much more hesitant to try them. So the most important statistic on this, a key point about these medicines that we're learning as the literature evolves, if you stop taking them, you regain weight quite quickly. And most experts in this space, certainly the ones I've talked to, think that these are going to be probably lifelong medicines for the individuals that take them if they want to keep the weight off. So we have a medicine that really works, but it's a lifelong commitment. You're saying, well, once I make the leap, if I want to stay at the weight that the medicine gets me to, I have to keep taking it. So the surveyors asked individuals who were interested in these medicines, they said, hey, well, what if we told you that if you stop taking the medicine, you're going to regain all the weight? And actually, when people heard that, interest declined by 70%. I think that's a really telling statement. In general, if people don't have to take a medicine, they really don't want to. That's certainly my experience clinically. I have a hard enough time convincing people who've had a heart attack to take a statin, a life-saving medicine after a cardiac event. There's a lot of hesitancy to take a medicine, and I think people's general disposition is more sophisticated and more complex than we and the media might give them credit for at first blush. So the ability to provide high quality counseling and education in these medicines is really important in making sure people are fully informed before they make a big commitment clinically and financially to a medicine. And so what about step therapy? What are we seeing in the market around step therapy? How have we been thinking about this here at Solera? For GLP-1s, step therapy is emerging as a new way to manage the points of friction, the economic considerations, and the medical benefit of these drugs. And we're seeing three important themes. The first being step therapy that integrates a trial of lifestyle change. This is still the foundation of obesity management. And a 3 to 6 month trial of lifestyle change can teach you a lot about how someone's doing, what level of change they're able to make in their life. And for some people, they can lose enough weight that it's enough to say, maybe I feel better, I'm doing the right things. I don't think I need a medicine to help me with this. I can do it making these more fundamental changes. And when you actually talk to folks, even folks struggling with their weight for a long time, they understand that these are valuable changes to make. And this is the things we all should be doing, right? Getting more physical activity, eating better, managing our lifestyle. So this is still the anchor, this idea of let's start with lifestyle change. The second reaction we're seeing is the reemergence of, we call them Gen 1 anti-obesity medicines. So these are older medicines for weight loss, things that are less commonly prescribed for a variety of reasons, but they include bupropion, naltrexone, phentermine, orlistat, and then it's not FDA approved for this indication, but we have been seeing folks who are offering metformin as an off-label product for weight loss. Metformin's been around forever. It's used in the treatment of diabetes, helps people lose weight, and it's for all intents and purposes free. So there are these other pharmacological options that, before you get to GLP, there are other things you can do in terms of medications. And then finally, and this is what we talked about in the last slide, this idea of member education coupled with high-value prescribers. So we know that when people actually get good education and really learn what these drugs entail, they're less likely to want them. And I think that's actually a very patient-centered form of informed decision-making, right? We want to tell people the truth, not just give them a prescription, not just in a 3-minute visit, give them a prescription because they told us that's what they want, but actually understand their goals and values and work with them. We're seeing a divergence of sorts between what you might call the GLP-1 mills, some of the virtual clinics and others that exist basically to just write prescriptions, to get as many folks in the door, write as many prescriptions as they can, and not provide the kind of high-value care and counseling and thoughtfulness that you would see with other higher value prescribers who emphasize the different steps in the process and commit to a long-term relationship with their patients. So between lifestyle change, these new, what's old is new again, the new resurgence of Gen 1 anti-obesity medicines, and then a combination of good education and high-value prescribers who really care about doing this right, we're seeing the step therapy landscape evolve into a really sophisticated multi-step pathway. Ed, I'll turn it over to you. Ed's going to talk about some of the operational challenges associated with this and the role of technology in managing this at scale.
Sure. Thanks, Byron. And you can go ahead to the next one. Yeah. So when you think about what goes on and some of the great step therapy approaches that Byron was talking about, the real challenge is that there's a real bottleneck in the data flows that are required to enable a step therapy approach. When you think about your traditional prior auth protocols, they're all based on clinical events, right? If you have an MRI, you need to get an X-ray first to have that covered. So that there's a very well-known tried and true path for that clinical protocol. Similar, even for something like bariatric surgery, you're going to have a clinical intake form, medical necessity form, and you're going to have the clinical notes that then have a workflow that your team is used to working on, or the prior auth team is used to working on, that can say, okay, sequentially, this person did what they needed to do, so now thumbs up, we can pay for that next higher cost service. When it comes to GLP-1s and you look at the literature, that they're really most successful when combined with lifestyle programs. And when you introduce a step therapy program, you want to progress that individual through all those steps that Byron was talking about. So as a health plan, how do you take these lifestyle variables and these behavioral variables that exist in things like Weight Watchers or Noom or any of other services that are not connected to the healthcare ecosystem, or have interoperability data flows, and how do you translate those variables into clinical event codes that can be ingested back into your clinical workflows to triage that individual through that step therapy approach? So you're kind of at this crossroad where the legacy systems have worked really well in the traditional healthcare ecosystem, but now the non-traditional healthcare ecosystem is really the front line of defense against these really high cost interventions. So the legacy world needs to kind of catch up to the new innovations, and the data models really need to be somewhat transformed and fixed to prevent these silos from happening. And then secondly, as you can stay on that one for just one more minute, Byron. So as you think about that person going through, we've heard about health plans who need their prior auth team to manually kind of try and figure this stuff out, right? They're getting 1,000 requests a week for folks on GLP-1s. They're having to look it up manually against another report to see what they did, to see if they lost weight, to see maybe what their last physical values were, right? So there's all these manual interventions going on right now. So in addition to the high cost, it's really creating a lot of downward pressure on these teams to be able to keep up with the demand and maintain that member experience, because the member is just saying, like, I just want to know if this drug is covered or not, right? So there's really a lot of tension here in the marketplace. And then going forward. So then as you think about it, right, even the players that are trying to support your members as they're on these therapies, they've kind of taken what they had and said, oh yeah, that'll work for GLP-1s too. And they have great programs, right? Don't get me wrong. All the different vendors out there do have excellent programs. But when you look at the speed of, quote unquote, innovation that has come out from some of the point solutions that are out there, those that have had lifestyle intervention or health coaching programs are now say, oh yeah, alongside GLP-1s, of course, our programs and our clinical protocols and our content will work. We've talked to other vendors that say, oh yeah, what we're really doing is we're bringing our protein and strength training content front and center for folks that we know are on GLP-1s because of the risks to rapid weight loss and making sure that that person maintains muscle mass as they're losing this weight. And then others are saying, oh yeah, our disease management programs have always helped deprescribe people from things like metformin. So yeah, that will work for GLP-1s as well. And when you look at this rapid innovation that's happened in the marketplace, at least for me, I'm like, great programs. They certainly have worked for historic disease management, historic lifestyle interventions for weight loss, but how are they really coordinating care across the ecosystem? And are they really optimizing their content and engagement models for people who are now on a novel therapy, right? So I think there's a lot of challenges to evaluate how does all this work together, and how do you have the right clinical oversight and governance to ensure that you have that consistent member experience and you're making sure that the people are getting the content and the interventions they need to succeed. Yep. So, what's it really take? So you take that data model, you take, the plethora of solutions that are out there. So when we looked at that Kaiser study, it turns out that yes, lots of folks are interested in going on GLP-1s. But then when you inform them that it's an injectable, that drops down to 24% of people are still interested in GLP-1s. And it makes sense because typically for people with type 2 diabetes, it takes about 7 years to insulinize them. Because, by and large, as somebody with type 1 diabetes, right, injections are no fun, right? So it is a commitment. Then when they find out that you have to be basically on it for life, that's going to drop down even further. And once you include that, there's other things that the FDA hasn't really yet approved about these drugs, the desire to go on a GLP-1 drops down to 9%. But the consumers aren't yet aware enough of all those factors. So one of the questions is, if you can engage the members appropriately, if you can reach out to them with digestible content that's relevant to them, are you able to create diversionary tactics that's going to make them more apt to join a lifestyle program, a much lower cost program, so that they can lose weight the old-fashioned way? Then secondly, as you triage that person from that lifestyle program into something that requires clinical support, how do you keep the data between those things? How does that clinical program, which operates in a silo, even with something like Weight Watchers and Sequence, that isn't passing data back and forth together yet, right? How do you make sure that that clinical program understands what the individual did in the lifestyle program? How do you create continuity for that member so that they don't have to start from the beginning? And further, if in that clinical intervention, metformin or the GLP-1 is prescribed, right? How does the lifestyle program then know that so the content can be sequenced in a way that creates a linear trajectory from where that person started to where they now are with the clinical intervention? And then finally, right, there are companies that are thinking about kind of step therapy all under one roof, and they're kind of shoehorning stuff together. But what I've found, right, and has kind of been surprising to me as I've evaluated a lot of these companies, is none of them are talking about all the other comorbids that this individual will have, right? Now, yes, GLP-1s are going to help that person lose weight, right? Weight loss will lead to reductions in complications for comorbidities. But the person still has to think about their diabetes. They still have to think about their hypertension, right? So how do you really ensure that the full clinical program for these folks is not just treating one condition? And as we've all seen, right, we have a tendency to treat the condition and not the patient. And given the data exchanges that are necessary between the entire ecosystem, we now have another layer of complexity to make it harder to treat the patient, right? To treat that person as a whole. So how do you create kind of that data nomenclature that's going to be consistent across all these stakeholders that allows you to enable a step therapy program, then it allows you to enable really an ecosystem to treat this individual for the variety of individual needs that they actually have?
Well, thanks, Ed. It's as Ed described, there's in addition to the clinical and economic issues, a really interesting technology issue that this has created. I mean, we've had medicines that are expensive before, but not where the eligible population is 42% or more of the population. And what we're going to do is move into a roundtable, and we'll open up the Q&A, and please don't hesitate to unmute and ask us questions. We're all friends here and known each other for a while. But I think I'll be particularly interested in hearing it if that's something that folks are dealing with. In terms of the discussion, we'd love to hear from you about, hey, what are the most pressing challenges you're facing in the next 12 months, in the next 36 months and beyond? Is your organization approaching step therapy for GLP-1s? And then are there other challenges that we didn't talk about today, but that you wanted to bring up or that you're interested in our opinion on? We've learned a lot about this landscape in the last 6 months, and are very familiar with a lot of the players in this space. So we're happy to be a resource in any way, and happy to answer more questions. So with that, I'd love to open up the chat and invite anyone to take a swing. Well, Ed, while we wait for some questions to come in, I'm curious on your take. If when you think about the most pressing challenges in the year ahead, what are some of your observations from the work we've done?
Yeah, even hearing from some of our largest health plan partners, I think that data challenge around prior auth and creating the right clinical workflows, right? That just seems like an operating challenge that is front and center, but because it really is around a square peg in a round hole today, and has the opportunity to create major frictions for the member. So even if you compare it to some of the surgical diversion companies that are out there, like a Carum or an Employer Direct Health or some of those guys, right? They tend to acquire that patient during the prior auth process, and the person finds out after the fact, and that can create a lot of member friction. So the more that from what I'm hearing, we can create clinical workflows and prior auth workflows that allow the member to kind of know, like the line counter in Disney World, like what's going to happen when and what they need to do to get the therapies they want. That's going to go a long way in like feeling that the member feeling like the health plan supports them versus the adversarial relationship that sometimes can happen because of the business practices.
We're hearing a lot about prior authorization in the news these days, and folks trying to dial back on prior authorization and alleviate some of the burdens of that. And as one problem is resolving, a new one presents itself. And when I think about here, the most pressing challenges from my point of view, from the clinical seat, this is a new landscape, and these clinical pathways are forming, but we don't have as much real world experience as we'd like in actually implementing them and gauging member response. We're gaining that now, but it's really seeing, hey, how are individuals who are coming to us for help, what are the most effective strategies that we can use to get them feeling like, yes, I'm getting healthier, I'm making the changes that I want. And then and this is a question for the nation, I think there's a real health policy question that the regulators should be working on around, 2, 3, 4 years from now. Are we going to be able to sustain the spend on these drugs, and do we need to do something to work with pharma on the pricing? I mean, if you actually look at the value created when someone loses weight, it can be in the many thousands of dollars a year, but only at the highest levels of obesity and weight loss do we actually start to get to the point where these medicines are cost saving year over year, which, we can, talking about pharma is maybe another rabbit hole, but I think it's pretty clear that these medicines are priced too high, and there's a lot of work to do to bring those costs down.
And Juria, if you're on, just because I haven't talked to you in a while, so I'll pick on you. What I know you look at a lot of the marketplace and are familiar with a lot of the vendors. What's resonating with you in this category, and how have you thought about it so far?
Well, I think the reality is, like, a lot of our vendors only have specific capabilities. So they only play in certain spaces. A lot of them can't prescribe, a lot of them can only offer guidance on things. So when they can't do something, they typically refer members to go see their doctor. And we know all providers are overloaded with their workload right now. So a lot of times, like, members go in there with solutions such as GLP-1s, because this is something that's hot on their mind too, if they're struggling with their weight. And providers sometimes give in and just say, okay, yeah, I think that's good. That's how they get their prescriptions. So I like the approach of educating members to know better, to know more before they go in. But do you guys know of any vendors or solutions that actually coordinate with providers as well? Because with the prior auth thing, I get that people are trying to remove prior auths, and providers are probably super ecstatic about that, because in interviewing providers, that's the one thing they hate most about insurance companies. It just adds administrative burden to their workload. So they'd like to get rid of them. Plus, they don't really want the payer to tell them how to do their job. But are there things that we can do, or solutions out there that actually bring all those disparate stakeholders together to educate them and do better?
It's a great question. I have not yet come across one that is doing everything under one roof. I think there are ones that have some potential, right? I think Weight Watchers and Sequence has some really interesting potential, but they have a lot of technology development to go to make it an integrated experience. And I think there's also friction with the, quote unquote teleprescribers, and like a Calibrate or a Found or any of those guys, and sending the person to their PCP for the prescription, because the Calibrates of the world want the RX revenue, right? They want to flow through them, and they have a great program, right? But that's part of their business model, right? And they're backed by Novo, right? So there's natural synergy there for what they're trying to do on the business side, or a natural tension there. So one of our questions, right, is, and not to point the finger back at Solera and say like we can support this, but does it require a layer on top of all that to coordinate the care, coordinate the data, and ensure that that member experience is optimized for how the health plan wants it? Because I think one of the other challenges is each health plan is going to have their own protocols, right? You all have your own medical teams. All those medical teams have their own appropriate perspective. And the fear is, by working with one vendor that has to figure out how do you scale that across multiple organizations, there may be less flexibility. So as you think about a single vendor, right, how much flexibility is actually needed to implement that clinical protocol and the data that allows that person to move from one gate to the next? And can one provider really support the world in the flexible way that you need?
Yeah, what I like about Solera's networks is that you guys don't offer a one size fits all solution. So when it comes to low risk, medium risk, high risk, you guys are able to segment that and even segment the attitudes and behaviors of people to match the program that would work best for them. So I do like that layer in there.
And has anyone on the call, worked on approaches to helping members get on GLP-1s or workflows, or even have horror stories of challenges in creating those prior auth workflows to be able to minimize the member frictions as people are kind of seeking out these therapies?
Jody, on this piece, I mean, you're having a lot of these conversations on our end as well. I'm curious if you have other anecdotes that you want to share about challenges that you've been hearing and impact from some of your conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Byron. Kind of across our client base, there's, and certainly all of our lovely clients on the call, feel free to put things in the chat or to come off mute, but who owns it, right? Who owns the process? Who owns, figuring out? There's been several conversations with clients where it's a lot of cross-functional departments kind of coming together, right? So it's certainly been a challenge to get movement, because it's a little bit of an uncharted territory, and it, covers many different departments, right? Especially when you're talking about more of bringing the clinical and lifestyle changes together. So, that's been part of it, or right, which I'm sure has never happened to any of my clients on this call. But as you think you've got it figured out and we're like, great, we're ready to go, then another department's like, wait, I have this idea, so like in the very beginning, when I talked about, there's a ton of different challenges just from creating these process, thinking about regulatory, operationally, it's all kind of, it's happening so quickly, Byron. And I'm sure you're seeing that across just your medical colleagues, right? That there's a lot of opinions, but it's all happening so quickly. So a lot of it is operational challenges as well.
Yeah, Jody, 100%. It's a combination of clinical, operational, regulatory, legal, a lot of, just when you thought you had it figured out, there's a new rub and a new problem to solve. And I think that's only going to continue, at least in the short to midterm, while we really get a handle on all of this.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking to clients about, so Byron and Ed certainly would love your take since you're not able to join all of those calls. But in our discussions, there's a lot of, how does this work with our existing solution? If we just have, the traditional DPP, if we have weight management already with you, which the majority of our client base does, and then we do spend a lot of time talking about just the program functions, right? How does engagement look different? What does that look like? So certainly from a product or clinical perspective, if you guys want to weigh in, since they hear it from me and the team, love any insights that you guys have to share on that as well.
Well, Jody, certainly from a clinical perspective, right off the bat, our weight management program provides that intensive lifestyle change that is on par with, it's a best-in-class program and helps people make exactly the kind of changes that we'd want them to make before pursuing an anti-obesity medicine. So that's the existing program can be seamlessly integrated into step therapy. And Ed can talk more about how that impacts operations and what we can do on that front.
Yeah, operationally, what we've been doing for years, right, as you think about our claims-based billing model, is taking digital attributes and transforming them into clinical event codes, CPTs, ICD-10s, whatever it may be. So we're kind of uniquely positioned to be able to extract that information out of the ecosystem and translate it into the variables that are going to work for your workflows. And in practice, what that means is we can take Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith can ask for that GLP-1. We can be really transparent about where she needs to start, that she needs to, lose maybe 2% of her start weight, maybe have 2 health coach interactions, and maybe read 5 articles, right? Let's say that's the clinical protocol you want to be able to unlock clinical support for obesity. Then maybe your next step is get her on metformin, right? Continue those lifestyle variables. We can kind of feed all that back into your protocols. And then maybe she's unlocked for the next step, which is GLP-1, right? So I think that's how, as Doria said, right, we're uniquely different in that our network and our ability to integrate all that data into all the silos and all the workflows hopefully allows us to create a really seamless member experience for you all that, caters to your unique clinical protocols.
With the member experience at the forefront, right, Ed? We certainly, are providing that education, an alternative, right? Like assistance in the program versus just hearing the go find it, or go take care of it on your own. Because member experience is certainly at the forefront of everything that, collectively on this call, no matter which organization you work at, we're trying to do. We're all trying to serve members and make sure it's a positive experience. If there's any other questions and or comments or things you would like to share based on what your organization is doing, we would love to hear from you. We do have more sessions, and certainly with your account team, we'd love to continue these conversations. And, if we need to bring in some additional folks, or, you want to have a conversation with Byron or Ed, certainly let your account team know. We can facilitate that as we're continuing to move down this path and, have discussions across the board with our client base, as well as prospects in the market. We want to thank you all for your time today. Certainly appreciate you guys giving us time and listening and engaging in the conversation. We look forward to further conversations with you, and everybody have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.